I always thought I had stepped into the kind of family people spend years praying for. A calm home, shared Sunday dinners, laughter that filled the room, and a sister-in-law who felt more like a little sister I was lucky to gain. For a long time, I believed I truly belonged there. I believed I fit. But the thing about moments that feel perfect is how easily they can fool you. Sometimes you don't see a line being crossed until you're already standing on the wrong side of it. I remember the exact day everything shifted. I was finishing a long shift at the hospital, still in my scrubs, when I noticed my phone lighting up nonstop. Family messages, plans, excitement, all about Chloe's graduation. And I was nowhere in the conversation. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe they forgot to loop me in. Maybe it wasn't intentional. That's the funny thing about trying to be understanding. You excuse a lot more than you should. I kept telling myself it was nothing, that families make mistakes, that Chloe adored me the way I adored her. I tried to believe the best, but then came the call. Her voice wasn't warm or confused or apologetic. It was firm, almost rehearsed, like she had been waiting to say it. She told me not to come. She said my presence made things complicated, that I pulled attention without meaning to, and she wanted a day that belonged to her. I didn't even know how to answer at first. It felt like being pushed out of a place I thought I had earned, like someone quietly locking a door I didn't realize could be locked at all. I told her I understood. I told her I wanted her to have her moment. And when I hung up, I sat there in my car, keys in my hand, wondering how I became the problem in a story I never wanted to compete in. I respected her wish. I stayed home on her big day. But as I found out later, Chloe's choice to shut me out wasn't the end of anything. It was only the beginning. Because just a few days later, the same girl who told me I wasn't welcome anywhere near her celebration called me again. Only this time, she wasn't confident or certain. She was crying, begging for help, saying I was the only person she could turn to. And that was the moment I realized everything I thought I understood about our relationship was about to change. If a family member told you not to show up to their milestone moment because you were too much, would you still go? Or would you walk away like I did? I couldn't shake her words, no matter how hard I tried. I went back to work the next morning, moving through the ER the way I always did, but my mind kept drifting back to that conversation with Chloe. Every time I heard a monitor beep or someone called my name, another part of me wondered if she was right. Maybe I really did make everything about me without realizing it. Maybe I was the problem and everyone else just didn't say it out loud. It's strange how fast doubt can take over when it comes from someone you care about. And the thing is, Chloe hadn't always been this way. There were moments over the years that make a lot more sense to me now. I can still hear my mother-in-law bragging about how steady my career is, telling people how proud she is that I can handle pressure like it's nothing. I can picture those family gatherings where someone would casually bring up how Matt and I were the stable couple, while Chloe sat there pretending she didn't hear the whispers about her on-again, off-again relationships. She would joke about it, trying to laugh it off, tossing out lines like, "Of course Emily did it better, she always does," with a smile that never reached her eyes. I missed the weight of that back then, or maybe I just didn't want to see it. When I finally opened up to Matt about everything, I thought he'd wrap me in some kind of reassurance. Instead, he just sighed and said, "Chloe gets emotional sometimes, and we should let it go." As if it didn't matter that his sister had shut me out of one of the biggest days of her life. As if I was overreacting for feeling hurt. It left me standing there, wondering who exactly I could lean on if the person I trusted most didn't really hear me. When graduation day came, I kept my word. I stayed home. I sat on the couch in sweats, scrolling through post after post. Chloe, in her cap and gown, smiling with everyone but me. No mention of the sister-in-law who held her while she cried over job rejections, helped her rehearse her speech, or spent hours editing her resume. I told myself I had done the mature thing, that choosing peace was the right call. I thought swallowing the hurt would be enough. But then my phone buzzed after the ceremony. It was a message from Chloe. She said she was glad I stayed away, that she needed a sister who knew when to disappear. That line stayed with me longer than I expected. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't heat of the moment. It was intentional. And it made one thing painfully clear. This wasn't just insecurity. This was personal. I remember staring at that message, feeling something shift inside me. I thought this was the end of it. I really did. But a few days later, my phone rang again, and the voice on the other end didn't sound anything like the girl who told me I wasn't welcome. If someone you considered family told you they were relieved you stayed away, would you ever trust them again? It was close to 2 in the morning when my phone lit up on the nightstand. I remember squinting at the screen, barely awake, wondering who would be calling at that hour. When I saw Chloe's name, my first instinct was confusion. After everything that had happened, she was the last person I expected to hear from. I answered anyway, and all I heard was her crying. Not the kind of crying you can fake or hold back. She could barely breathe between words. It took a full minute before she finally got out what she needed to say. She was pregnant, and she was alone. I sat there, trying to make sense of it while she kept talking through tears. She said Jason was supposed to show up at her graduation, was supposed to stand beside her and help her tell the family. He had promised a future, a plan, a partnership. But the moment things became real, he turned it around on her, accused her of trapping him, and walked out. She told me he blocked her, left her sitting in her apartment with nothing but a test in her hand and a future she was never prepared for. The same girl who told me I wasn't welcome at her celebration was now whispering that she didn't know what to do, that she didn't have anyone else to call. And then she said something that hit harder than I expected. She told me she called because I'm the only person she trusts with something this serious, because I understand medical risks, because I've been through rough situations myself. Hearing her say that pulled me into a place I haven't touched in years. There was a time in my early 20s when I faced something almost identical to what she was going through now. I never told the family the full truth. Most people in my life still don't know. And even though I didn't say it out loud, the memory of that fear, that isolation, came rushing back the moment she said she needed help. Everything about this moment felt twisted. Part of me was still angry, still hurt over the way she pushed me aside. But another part of me could hear the panic in her voice, and it hit a nerve I thought had healed. She asked me what she should do next. Prenatal care, telling her parents, deciding whether she should keep the baby, figuring out where to even start. She kept repeating the same line through tears. "You're the only one I can trust right now." I sat there on the edge of the bed, staring into the dark, phone pressed to my ear. My chest felt tight with everything I wanted to say. I wanted to tell her how much she hurt me. I wanted to ask why I'm only good enough when her world falls apart. But none of that came out. Instead, one question formed in my mind. Do I help the girl who shut me out, or hang up and protect what's left of my heart? If someone who hurt you deeply called you in the middle of a crisis, would you help them, or would you walk away? After I hung up that night, sleep wasn't an option. I ended up pacing the kitchen in the dark, replaying everything Chloe had said, while Matt kept asking what was going on. I could hear the concern in his voice, but I couldn't even put my own thoughts in order. Part of me still remembered how easily she pushed me aside. The other part kept circling back to the fact that there was a baby involved, a baby who didn't get to choose any of this. I kept thinking about that girl I used to be years ago, scared and alone, wishing someone had been there for me the way Chloe said she needed me now. The conflict in my chest felt almost physical. It took until sunrise for me to finally make a decision. I texted Chloe and told her we could meet, but it would be at a coffee shop near the hospital, not at my home. I needed neutral ground. When she walked in, she looked nothing like the polished version of herself she put online. Her makeup was smudged, her hair pulled back without a thought, hands shaking around a cup of water. I sat across from her, calm, steady, almost detached. For the first time, I felt like I was the one in control of the room. She started talking fast, almost rambling, trying to fill the silence with explanations about Jason, about how everything fell apart, about why she didn't know who else to call. I let her talk until she ran out of breath. Then I told her exactly what I was willing to do and what I wasn't. I said I would help her with medical guidance and make sure she stayed safe. But I wouldn't lie to the family, and I wouldn't protect Jason from the truth. Her reaction was a mix of relief and discomfort, like she wasn't used to me setting the terms. And honestly, it felt strange to say the words out loud. It wasn't anger, it wasn't resentment, it was clarity. For once, I wasn't shrinking myself to make her comfortable. I could see her trying to process that shift. She muttered an apology, something about being jealous and feeling overshadowed, but it wasn't full or complete. It was just enough to pull me a little closer without letting me forget what she had already done. As I listened to her, something changed inside me. I stopped seeing her as the girl who hurt me, or even as family. Instead, I saw someone who needed guidance, the way any vulnerable patient might. It put distance between us in a way that made everything easier to navigate, and it made me realize that helping her didn't mean losing myself this time. When we finished talking, I pulled out my phone and started arranging her first appointment, and as I added her name to the schedule, one thought stayed with me. I told myself I was doing it for the baby, but the more I considered everything she had done, the more I wondered if this was my chance to finally stop being the one everyone walked over. What would you do in my place? Help with no conditions, refuse completely, or help while quietly taking back control? Taking Chloe to her first prenatal appointment felt strange, almost like stepping into a role I didn't fully choose but couldn't walk away from. I sat beside her while the nurse went through every detail: vitamins, risks, what symptoms to watch for, how her body would change. Chloe nodded the whole time, but I could see how scared she was. The arrogance she used to hide behind wasn't there. She looked small, lost. And even though part of me still carried the sting of her words from before, another part softened just a little. After the appointment, I stepped outside to make a call and found myself slipping into an old habit, looking for answers in places most people don't think to check. A coworker mentioned she'd heard something about Jason from a nurse at another clinic. That was enough for me to start digging quietly. It didn't take long to learn the truth that Chloe didn't know yet. Jason wasn't heartbroken or confused. He wasn't even alone. He was already seeing someone else. Pictures, tagged posts, comments, none of it subtle. And the worst part was discovering rumors that Chloe wasn't the first girl he had run from. There might even be another pregnancy he'd walked away from. I remember staring at my phone, feeling this heat rise in my chest. Not sadness, not shock. Something sharper. The kind of feeling that whispers you could ruin someone like him without lifting much more than a finger. And the options were right there. Screenshots I could send to his boss, messages I could forward to his new girlfriend, a simple anonymous email to his family. I had never felt temptation hit so fast, but just when I thought I knew what direction I was heading in, I overheard Chloe talking on the phone later that day. She was in the other room, thinking I couldn't hear her. She said I was desperate for validation, that I only helped her because it made me feel above her. Hearing that pulled something deep inside me. It hurt in a way I didn't expect, because it showed me she still didn't understand what I was trying to do, or maybe she didn't want to. That moment added fuel to the part of me that wanted to turn everything upside down. But it also made me see how damaged she really was, how long she had been carrying her own shame. It didn't excuse anything, but it explained a lot. Later that night, I found myself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, going through every version of the conversations I imagined having with both Chloe and Jason. Sometimes I pictured myself staying calm, explaining the truth. Other times, I imagined finally letting everything out. It was strange hearing my own voice rehearse things I had never said out loud. And somewhere between those rehearsals, I realized the choice I made next wasn't just about them. It was about the kind of person I was becoming. I picked up my phone and opened Jason's profile. I had every piece of proof I needed to destroy him. But the longer I stared at that screen, the more I realized I wasn't just deciding what to do to him. I was deciding who I wanted to be. Is exposing someone's lies revenge, or is it justice? Where would you draw the line? I knew the night was going to be tense the moment Chloe asked me to come to dinner. She said she was finally ready to tell her parents about the pregnancy, and she needed everyone there. She also mentioned that Jason agreed to show up and prove he cared, which immediately told me everything I needed to know about how she was still trying to hold the pieces together. Walking into that dining room felt like walking into a stage everyone else thought was a celebration. Her parents had cooked a full meal, candles lit, the table set like it. Was some kind of family milestone. I sat down feeling this knot form in my stomach because I already knew Jason wasn't the man he pretended to be. And yet, when he walked through the door, he came in smiling, hugging Chloe's mom, shaking hands with Matt's dad, acting like the perfect partner. He pulled out chairs, complimented the food, and talked about how he had been thinking a lot about the future. I watched him across the table, every word smooth, every gesture practiced. It was almost impressive how easily he slipped into the role of devoted father-to-be. Chloe kept glancing at him like she was clinging to any sign that tonight would go the way she hoped, and all I could do was sit there quietly, with my phone in my pocket, the evidence I found waiting for me to choose whether I'd speak up or stay silent. I stayed quiet through the small talk, through Jason's stories about sacrifice and commitment, through Chloe's nervous smiles. But when he started talking about how he planned to be there for every appointment, how he wanted to show he was a man of his word, that was the moment something inside me settled. I asked him if that promise applied to the other girl he took to the same restaurant last week. The entire table went still. He froze, and Chloe's face dropped before she even understood the details. I didn't raise my voice. I just asked him one question after another. About the messages where he said he'd never be a father, about the second girl, about everything he tried to hide. And each time he lied, I held up the proof. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just laid out the truth he thought he could outrun. Chloe broke. Not just because of Jason, but because she realized I knew and chose this moment to bring everything out. She accused me of wanting the drama, of finally taking the chance to hurt her back. Her words came out in pieces, loud and desperate, and I could feel the whole room start to fracture around us. Matt tried to calm her, tried to pull the conversation together, but it was too late. His parents looked caught between shock and anger, unsure who to blame. Half the table turned on me, saying I could have handled it differently. The other half looked at Jason like they couldn't believe they ever welcomed him in. Chloe finally stood up, tears streaking down her face, and ran out of the house before anyone could stop her. And as the room filled with voices arguing over who was right and who went too far, I sat there, feeling both emptied and strangely steady. For the first time, I hadn't stayed quiet. I hadn't protected anyone's image. I finally told the truth. But as I watched Chloe disappear into the night, one thought cut through everything. Had I just saved her or destroyed what little we had left? Would you expose the truth in front of everyone if it meant protecting a baby, but possibly losing your family? The house felt unusually quiet in the days after that dinner. No messages from Chloe, no calls from anyone, not even the usual family group chat updates. It was like everyone collectively decided to freeze time until someone else made the first move. Part of me felt justified for finally telling the truth, but another part kept replaying the look on Chloe's face when everything fell apart. I couldn't shake that mix of anger and heartbreak she carried out the door with her. On the fourth day, I heard a knock at the door, and when I opened it, my mother-in-law was standing there with this expression that told me she had come both ready to yell and ready to surrender. She walked inside without waiting for an invitation, took a seat at the kitchen table, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Then she admitted she was upset at how things unfolded, but she also said something I didn't expect. She told me Chloe had always grown up feeling like she was second best, long before I entered the picture. She said relatives constantly compared Chloe to other girls in the family, and she always came up short in their eyes. It wasn't meant to be cruel, but years of hearing those comments chipped away at her confidence. My mother-in-law hesitated before sharing the next part. She told me there was a pregnancy scare when Chloe was 17, something the family handled poorly. Instead of support, there was judgment, shame, and a lot of silence. She said Chloe never really recovered from how alone she felt during that time. Hearing that shifted something in me, because I knew that feeling, more than I ever admitted out loud. Later that night, when the house was quiet, I sat on the floor of our bedroom and allowed myself to think back to a part of my life I usually kept locked away. I remembered the toxic relationship I survived in my early 20s. I remembered the moment I found out I was pregnant. And I remembered losing it alone, without anyone believing what I went through or what that loss did to me. That experience was the reason I became a nurse, the reason I refused to let any woman face something like that without guidance. And it was the reason Chloe's call hit me the way it did. I never connected those dots until now. Looking at everything through this new lens made it impossible to see Chloe as just the girl who hurt me. I saw someone carrying years of wounds she never learned how to treat. It didn't erase what she'd done. It didn't make the words she threw at me any less painful, but it did change the weight of it. For the first time, I understood that the real problem wasn't just her. It was the comparisons, the silence, the way the family brushed things under the rug instead of addressing them. It was a pattern that shaped both of us in different ways. Later that night, I opened a drawer and took out an old sonogram picture I kept tucked away. I hadn't looked at it in years. Holding it in my hands reminded me of a version of myself I tried to forget. And as I stared at it, one thought settled in. I had spent so long trying to be the strong one that I forgot what it felt like to be the scared girl in the clinic with no one to hold her hand. Maybe that was why I couldn't bring myself to hate Chloe completely, no matter how hard I tried. Have you ever learned something about someone's past that suddenly changed how you saw their behavior, even if it didn't excuse it? In the days that followed, I realized I had spent so much time reacting to everyone else that I hadn't stopped to ask myself what I actually wanted. One night after work, I sat on the edge of the bed with my phone and recorded a voice note, something I hadn't done in years. I talked about wanting a life where I didn't have to tiptoe around someone else's moods. I admitted that calling Jason out felt satisfying, but there was a part of it that left me uneasy, like I had crossed a line inside myself I wasn't proud of. I didn't want to become someone who fought fire with fire just because it felt good in the moment. I wanted more than that. I wanted peace that didn't depend on anyone else changing. The next morning, I finally reached out to Chloe. I didn't send some long, emotional message. I kept it simple. I told her I was available if she needed medical help or emotional support, but I wasn't going to force my way back into her life. It was my way of drawing a line without slamming the door shut. It felt strangely freeing to communicate without seeking approval. A few days later, I went to a support group after my shift. I didn't expect to say much, but when I started talking, everything spilled out. The frustration, the betrayal, the exhaustion of trying to be the strong one. I talked about how betrayal from a partner hurts, but betrayal within a family leaves a different kind of scar. When I walked out of that room, something felt lighter. I understood then that revenge wasn't the satisfying answer I thought it would be. The real win was choosing a life that wasn't dictated by someone else's chaos. So I started putting my own pieces back together. I picked up projects at work I'd been avoiding. I spent more time with Matt actually talking, not just coexisting. I even went back to hobbies I had dropped when everything with Chloe consumed my energy. And then one afternoon, Matt mentioned that Chloe went to her prenatal appointment on her own. No reminders, no drama. Just went. It was a small thing, but it told me that something I said, or maybe the boundaries I set, had reached her in a way nothing else had. As I walked out of the clinic after a long shift, I felt a calm I hadn't felt in months. For the first time, my life didn't feel like it was tied to someone else's crisis. I didn't know if Chloe would ever forgive me. I didn't know if I would ever fully forgive her. But I did know one thing. I was done abandoning myself. What does closure look like for you? An apology, revenge, or simply deciding to move on? Rebuilding. My life didn't happen all at once. It came in small shifts that I didn't even recognize at first. The biggest one started with a conversation I had been avoiding. One night after dinner, I finally sat down with Matt and told him how alone I felt when he dismissed everything that happened with Chloe. I told him how heavy it was carrying the emotional weight of his family by myself. He didn't interrupt. He just listened. And then he apologized, not with excuses, but with real reflection. He admitted he should have supported me from the beginning, that he didn't realize how much pressure I had been under. From that moment, something changed between us. He showed up differently. He checked in more. He backed me when decisions needed to be made. It felt like a new start instead of a patch over old wounds. I also found myself leaning more on people outside the family, my coworkers, the friends who always offered support without judgment, even a mentor at the hospital who reminded me that family doesn't always come from shared blood. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like everything was on my shoulders. Meanwhile, updates about Chloe trickled in through Matt. Nothing dramatic, just small pieces of information that told a bigger story. She was going to therapy. She was looking for part-time work. She was actually following through on her appointments. It wasn't a perfect transformation, but it was progress, and it felt genuine. Then came the announcement that the family was planning a small baby shower. Suddenly, the question wasn't just whether I'd be invited. It was whether I would go if I was. I thought long and hard about what that would mean. I wasn't willing to walk back into a dynamic where I became the scapegoat. I wasn't willing to pretend everything was fine while ignoring the damage that had been done. So I made a quiet promise to myself. I would only go if the invitation came from Chloe directly, not from her parents, not from Matt, not from anyone trying to smooth things over. If she wanted me there, she had to say it herself. A few days later, a message popped up on my phone. It was from Chloe, short, honest. She asked if I would come, not as her nurse, not out of obligation, but as someone who understands fear, uncertainty, and how hard it is to face things alone. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was real. And as I stood there staring at that message, I realized I wasn't the same person who once begged to be included in her graduation. This time, the question wasn't whether she wanted me there. It was whether I wanted to be there. If you were in my place, would you go to that baby shower? Or is some damage too deep to ever risk again? Walking into the baby shower that day felt nothing like walking into her graduation would have. I didn't dress to impress or to prove anything. I chose something simple, something that made me feel like myself, and I made a quiet promise before I stepped through the door. If anything felt wrong, if the air shifted back into old patterns, I could leave. No explanations, no guilt. It was the first time in my life I walked into a family event on my own terms. The room went quiet for a moment when I arrived. Not cold, just unsure. I could feel people trying to figure out how to act around me after everything that happened. So I smiled, said hello, and let the awkwardness pass through me instead of sticking to me the way it used to. Slowly, the tension started to melt, and that's when Chloe finally looked at me. Really looked at me. She walked over with this mix of fear and gratitude in her eyes and thanked me. Not just for helping her through the appointments, but for telling the truth about Jason even though it ripped everything open. She said she wasn't ready to hear it back then, but she was ready now. Then she took a breath and apologized. She admitted she was jealous, that she punished me for things that had nothing to do with me, that shutting me out of her graduation was about her own insecurity, not anything I did. It wasn't dramatic or emotional for show. It was honest in a way she had never been with me before. And standing there in front of her, I realized I didn't need her to be perfect. I just needed her to take responsibility for the things she had avoided for years. When it was my turn to respond, I told her the truth. I said I accepted her apology, but I wasn't going to shrink myself anymore. I wasn't going to dim who I was to make anyone feel comfortable. And I wasn't going to let myself be painted as the villain in someone else's story just because it was easier for them. She nodded, and for once it didn't feel forced. It felt like she was ready to grow in ways she never could have before. Later, at her follow-up appointment, I stood beside her as she listened to the baby's heartbeat. Watching her face soften reminded me of something I hadn't thought about in years. That baby wasn't just a new chapter for her. It was a chance to break the cycle of silence, shame, and comparison that shaped so much of this family. A chance for the next generation to start without the wounds we carried. And somewhere in that quiet room, I felt myself shift too. Revenge gave me a moment of release, but it wasn't what changed my life. What changed everything was choosing myself, choosing boundaries, choosing compassion without losing my dignity. I didn't get the perfect sister I once imagined, but I got something better. I got myself back. So I'll leave you with the same question I had to ask myself. If you could start over, not with a different family, but with a different version of you, what would you stop apologizing for today? And what is one boundary you wish you had set sooner in your life? Or